Morning.
How are you?
Doing well. Doing well.
Good.
You sound a little bit distant.
I'll turn this on.
There we go.
By the way, if you hear sneezing and snifflings, that's my allergies acting up.
Gotcha. That's no fun. I can't seem to get the video portion to work on mine, but
Yes or not?
Somebody doesn't have headphones, so we've got an echo going on.
Yeah, probably would be yes. We don't have a headphone. Let me close the door. That will help a little bit. And I can put it on mute and let you guys talk and kind of flip back and forth if that would be fine. Because we got a group of people in my office right now. So can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Why does the video not work? Oh, there we go. Start my video. There we go. Hi, guys.
Did you want to just say hi?
No, the important people are in there.
She made me mad. I'm going to do this.
There you go. Okay, I see it's a fine-looking group we have there, and I'm going to start the car, so you won't hear from me anymore because I'll be driving.
All right, sounds good.
Drive careful, Don.
Okay.
Well, let me do this, Brodie and the rest of the gang. I'm just going to offer a word of prayer kind of as we begin and start talking today, and just ask the Lord's presence and guidance as we look at this going forward, okay? God of heaven and earth, I do thank you, praise you, and honor you for all that you do, and I thank you for the group that you've gathered here. I thank you for Brodie and his wisdom and expertise in this area, and I pray, Lord, that the blessing that has been for my kids, the blessing that Camp Vertical has been for the many kids in the Brookfield and Waukesha area, I pray, Lord, that blessing would be transmitted here, Heavenly Father, and be put here to bless the people here in Virginia Beach. We ask all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 All right. Hey, Brodie, this is the kind of the crew that I have together. I have the team that, I guess, the implementation team. I have the vice president of our congregation. You'll see the president of our congregation. He looks like he's on there as well. I also have Travis, and Travis is from our district office, and they're kind of like they're teaming with us to kind of hear a little bit more about this opportunity to see how we can help to bring this to other areas in our district. So you have a full crew here that's very excited to hear what's happening and such. So I put a small little agenda together, an overview on how I think it might be helpful to go along with the conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, I am getting an echo. I'm on my earbuds, though, so hopefully we don't get too much feedback. And if I get thrown, it's because I hear my own voice about a half second behind when I say it, which is never a good thing. I think what I would start by saying is just thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. This is something that has had my heart for a very long time. A little bit of my background, just so you're wondering, okay, who's the guy that we're talking to? And besides the fact that Pastor Whitfield speaks well of him, does he actually have any expertise behind him or experience? I've been in children's ministry and education for about 20 years. My undergrad is from Cedarville University in elementary education. I have my master's in children and family studies from Bethel Seminary in Minneapolis. And one of my greatest desires, just really put into my heart by God himself, I think, is that kids would know and understand who Jesus is and what his word means. And those things are not easily come by in this day and age because there's a whole lot of people who would like to tell you that Jesus is a certain way when his word really tells us very clearly who he is. And then sometimes we teach his word in a way that makes us afraid of God, when actually I think that the Bible is one of the most interesting things, and it's the most important thing that they can that they can know. And if we can make that interesting and exciting and integrated into everyday life in an environment that's high energy and fast paced, then I think that we win on so many levels. And if we win with a generation of kids, then the world can be a different place. And I firmly believe those things with all of my heart. And I was in children's ministry. I was a teacher for 2 years. I was in children's ministry for 17. And then I went into senior leadership in our church here for about 3 or 4 years to just really help put those things into place from a larger level. So I've tried to deal with these things from a whole lot of levels. And the Camp Vertical concept is one of this, is that if you can address a number of different audiences, you can create an environment that wins on so many levels that it's hard to believe. And the biggest win is that kids would know Jesus, and they would be curious about his word, and they would fall in love with his word, and that would be the thing that dictates their processing and their decision making and their future. And so when we start talking about camps, I hope you're okay with me kind of getting down into the nitty gritty, because I can share how exciting it is, and I can share all the stories, and I probably will. But I think that what you're probably asking, and Pastor Whitfield, change my mind if I'm different. What you guys are asking is, how does this actually work?
Yes. How does it work from the beginning all the way to the middle?
Yeah. So, at the end, we don't know, because we're only 10 years in on this, and so that's the middle looks pretty good from where we're at. So the way that we started, and the way that I think you need to start, is you need to consider that you have 4 different audiences that you're going to be addressing with a camp system like this. First and foremost, I mean, it's a camp aimed at kids, and so you got to think, oh, okay. When you think of a kid and how you reach them with the good news of Jesus as a church, okay, parents are the primary spiritual influencers of their children. Scripture says that. We need to make sure that we include that. But if you're going to look at how does the church, or how does a camp setting reach kids, you have to ask a couple questions. First, when are they most available? And for the church, they're most available during evenings, on weekends, and during the summer. And, the church has done a really good job of taking care of weeknights and offering programs that would be midweek programs or other things. We've done a pretty good job of saying, hey, we're going to make opportunities available on the weekends during the school year. But by and large, the church has not taken advantage of the largest single space of time that kids have available, and that is the summer. And kids are looking for things to do. Parents most likely are going to be looking for a place for their kids to be. And what the church has largely done for a very long time, and don't worry, I'm not a critic of the church. I'm actually the biggest fan of the church. I think that God works through his church to change the world. But I also know that we miss opportunities. And one of the opportunities that we've missed for a long time is the summer, because parents are looking for good childcare. Kids are looking for something that they actually want to do. And what we've provided many times as a church is an environment that would be a vacation Bible school, which is great, except that many times it's a half day in which adults tell kids, here's what you're going to do. We think this will be fun for you, so this is what you are going to do. And so what Camp Vertical does is it says, okay, if I'm a kid, first of all, when am I most available? Well, summer's going to be most available during the day. Second is, what would I like? What would I like? What do I, as a kid, not have a whole lot of, but I would really like to have, and that is choice. And so can we actually create an environment where a kid gets to choose, to a certain extent, what they're going to be doing for that entire experience, or for a lot of that experience? Because if a kid chooses it, they're 90% more likely to not be a behavioral difficulty. And so they're saying, I want to do this, I want to be here, and so I'm going to engage, and that eliminates behavior problems like you wouldn't believe. And then the next thing you have to go is not only when are they available and what do they want, which is probably choice. Third, we have to say, how are they made up? And this is where we have to go back to how are kids psychologically, physiologically and emotionally made up. And the fact is that education gives us a background for that, and that we can look and we can understand that there are different learning styles and there are multiple intelligences, not multiple personalities. That's a different issue. Multiple intelligences, which says that kids are skilled and engaged at different things. There's athletic intelligence and musical intelligence and academic intelligence and all these different things. There's 8 different types. And if we can address some of those things, as well as say, if some kids really like art, and some kids really like sports, and some kids really want to learn how to do a puppet, or they want to learn to cook in a safe environment because mom and dad won't let them do that at home. How can we take the things that kids would normally like to do? How do we create spaces for them to enjoy those things? But at the center of that, build a schedule that's centered around helping them understand who Jesus is and putting them into contact with leaders who are dedicated to Jesus, who are growing themselves, who are close to their age, and who they can have a ton of fun with. If you can create that for a kid, if you can say, I get to do what I want to do, it actually resonates with me, and I get to do it with leaders that I think are super cool, you create an environment that is almost irresistible. Okay, so you've got the kid side of things. I'm going to blow through all 4 audiences, and then we can ask questions if that's okay. The second, and I talk really fast, I'm sorry. The second audience is the parents. And this is where you got to look around and say, okay, what is the condition of our parents right now? Do we live in a community that's largely a 1-income household, a 2-income household, all these different things? What is the need? What are parents needing? What are they looking for? When we looked around, and you'll see some of it in the documentation that I sent over, which was my proposal to our Council of Elders, is that we looked at the census data. In 2006, we looked at the census data from 2000, and we extrapolated out our area in 3, 5, and 10-mile circles. And we found that within 10 miles of our campus, there were 55,000 kids between the ages of 5 and 14. That number has now grown to 90,000 kids between the ages of 5 and 14, of which 60% of those households were dual-income households. And 50% of those dual income households made a combined less than $50,000, which is pitiful as far as income. And so what we were finding is that, we have a ton of kids available to us in a space of time when almost nobody's competing for it as far as church-wise, but the park organizations are well versed with this. We have families who need very inexpensive childcare that they can trust, and so that we have a need where a parent may use this for childcare, and we actually use it for the kingdom. And we get to look at a parent and say, hey, we're going to provide something that can go from 7:30 to 5:30. Part of it's extended care on either side of a camp day, but we're going to provide something that's excellent, that's safe, that your kid loves and can't wait to go back to, and we're going to provide it for a length of time that you can use it as your summer childcare. And then all of a sudden we've met the needs of the kids because they're actually loving this environment if we've set it up right. We've got parents who say, hey, here's my need. I need it to be safe. I need my kid not to complain about it every morning. I want them dragging me out the door to get there. And I want them to come home tired because I'm tired. One of our parents, we called it Camp Vertical, and he called it Camp Horizontal because his kids came home and went straight to sleep on the living room floor. And so you've got to win with the kids, you got to win with the parents, but now there's another audience that you need to look at, and that is you've got kids that are in middle school and high school that also have a lot of available time or are looking for summer employment. And you got kids in your midst who, if they could get a sniff or a taste of what ministry could actually be, of helping people understand who Jesus is, of seeing life change right in front of them, you might have your next generation of missionaries and pastors and folks who are going to work in the business world, but who are going to invest in children for the rest of their lives because they can't get over the impact that they've seen it have. And so now you have the ability, if set up right, and we'll talk about this, is that kids pay an amount that, or the parents pay an amount that seems really cheap to them. It gives us enough money to hire individuals at a number where they can make a summer of income and they can see ministry happen, and they'll come back again and again and again because you continue to teach them leadership skills and give them increased responsibility, and they're going to have a blast doing it, and they see life change right in front of them. And suddenly you have a win-win-win on kid and parent and leader levels. And then the last one, though, and this is the church leadership level, is they're going to look at a number of things and should. the first thing they're going to look at is how much is this going, I hate to say this, I'm not a cynic, this is just important because I've sat in senior leadership at a church. How much is this going to cost us? Can we afford this? And the truth about this is there's going to be a little bit of seed money needed for whatever location you use, and there's going to be some building alterations, maybe a screen here or something there that needs to get put in. But by and large, this is not only self-sustaining once it's set up, it actually makes money to feed back into the children's areas of the church. So if some of your money that you're allocating in your budget is, hey, we've got to continue to renovate or update the children's areas, this actually is a way to do that, because it can easily, by the second year, not only be revenue neutral, but it can actually be making a surplus that you can put back into equipment, that you can put back into marketing, that you can put back into the building, that you can put back into staffing, and those types of things. And I've seen it work again and again and again, not just at Elmbrook, but at 5 other campuses that we've helped to plant. It becomes not only self-sustaining, but revenue generating really quickly, and it's not rocket science. It's just volume. And then the second thing that senior leadership should ask is this just going to be a bunch of noise and wear and tear on the building without eternal significance? Because if you're having a ton of fun, that's great, but how do you know? How do you know there's eternal significance? And I think that's going to be something where the leadership of the camp is going to have to say, we're going to be intentional about discipleship. Is that not only are we going to have a lot of fun and it's going to be crazy, energetic and all those different things, but then when a kid and a leader have a significant conversation, we're gonna document that. Not that we're keeping a list, but we're gonna say, hey, this is a conversation that happened. This is a life that a kid gave their life to Christ and is now following. This is a leader who finally got it, and this is the way they've changed from here to here. We document those things. We tell the stories because that's important, because the responsibility of senior leadership is to say we need to be good stewards of our resources and good stewards of our facilities and good stewards of our time and energy and what we're going to put our muscle behind. And when we can say, hey, we're actually talking about life change and we're actually paying attention, not just how many kids are showing up, but to conversations that are significant and decisions that are important, then we start to see that there's real value. You know, kids are going to come to this environment because it's just a place they want to be. The real success is not in how many kids you have there. The real success is in how many critical conversations that would never happen anywhere else, and they might not have with their parents, are had with a high school, college-age leader who's been trained to have them, is willing to have them, and then tell the parent about it so that the parent then can take it from there. And that I know that there's a lot of training, a lot of strategy that goes with that, but those are the 4 layers. And if the kids can see it as a win because they're having a blast, if parents see it as a win because their kids are safe and the price is right, if leaders are being developed in high school and middle school and even into college, and they see their responsibility and their leadership capabilities ever increasing because of what they're learning and what they're experiencing, and they can even transfer that to other environments. And if church leadership says, hey, we're hearing the stories and we're seeing the life change and we're seeing families be impacted and they're being attracted to an environment, and then they come and give church a try, maybe for the first time or maybe again, if those are wins that we can have on all levels, then the work, which is hard and extensive, is well worth it. So I'll stop there. I can get on my soapbox. Sorry.
All right, guys, just a few questions.
Yep.
First of all, Brodie, my name is Beth Yoakum, and you cannot see me in this video. But I've worked in childcare my entire life and in private schools, and I love your language and your philosophy of education and how you are proposing to reach children. And I'm totally on board with that. Do you know if there are any grants available to help with the startup of programs like this?
You know, that's a good question. We went with internal grants rather than external grants, just because we were a religious nonprofit, and there's private foundations that you can go after with that, but there wasn't as much available. So we decided to internally grant things, and then we paid it back over a couple of years.
Thank you.
That is a good question as far as timing on this. I think I mentioned to you our goal to try to get this kind of established is summer 2019. you think that's enough time to kind of get things in motion?
For sure. If you take a look at the document that I put there, we proposed it to the elders in September of 2006, and we launched in June of 2007.
Okay. Other questions?
Good morning. This is Steve here, Wacker.
Mm-hmm.
The big question I have, of course, and Rex probably has there too, is what was the initial seed funding? How much were you looking for?
Yep.
And how much additional space did you need for storage and stuff at the school or at the church?
Those are good questions. So, okay, let me kind of give you a picture of scale. The church I kind of created this at was a church where they call about 10,000 people call home. So we were starting on a pretty large scale, and we needed to do some pretty big renovation in a couple of larger rooms, technological renovations. So when we put together a proposal, there were two pieces to that. The first was seed money to get equipment and marketing and stuff like that, and I figured that to be probably between 15 and 25,000. That because I mean you got to have balls and frisbees and bats and hoops and all these different things. I don't know what you have. If I could see your space, I'd be able to tell you a little bit more. But then when we started looking at updating some of our spaces to make them not just doable, but actually things that moved it forward and could be used on the weekends to really move our programs forward, then the church came behind us, a church that size and the rooms that size, and offered $100,000 of seed money total, which included all the room updates and things like that. And so I realize that's a pretty big amount, but there's a lot of churches that are doing it in a much different scale and are looking at $10,000-$15,000 in seed money to start things up, depending on facilities. And what I can do when it's time is I have documents of budgets and things like that I can show the groups of people that might need to see that, of how it worked for us. And then you can kind of see how that how that all played out monetarily when you get into a year-to-year budget.
All right, Beth has a question that she'd like to ask.
Yeah.
So my position will be director of the child care and preschool and kindergarten programming here at Hope.
Mm-hmm.
I see a possibility here, and I just wanted your input on it. Some of these things that will need modified and equipment that needs purchased will be able to be used by both programs. So it's not like you're spending all this money on just the summer. Do you see that as something that would be able to work back and forth with the child care, preschool, kindergarten program as well?
I do. And I wish it had worked better at our place in that whole thing. I mean, education and even church world is that sometimes there's territory, and equipment can be territory. And so I think you'll have to navigate those waters. But ideally, what you would want is that you're purchasing equipment and that it gets used to its full extent and then bought again. And if it can be used to its full extent by summer being able to use it and others being able to use it during the school year time, then I think that's a win-win for everybody, and it's a good stewardship of resources. It's just a matter of people being able to work together to be able to manage that. And I don't know if your preschool and other things go into the summer. You'll have to look at how those things can coexist without being competition to each other necessarily, because ours ended up being, we had kids from 4 years old all the way through exiting 5th grade, and we had two different programs, 4 years old through going into 1st grade, and then going into 2nd through going into 6th. Those two programs were separate, and they were geared differently because when you have a high energy, fast-paced environment with a lot of kids, those younger kids need a different type of environment just because of the way they're developing and the way that they handle stimuli. They need a different type of environment than those bigger kids. And the bigger kids need to be able to run free without worrying about killing a younger kid in their environment. So we built two different ones, and I can explain that further as we go.
Yeah, I'm going to be very curious about that, especially there's a couple things I just want to throw out. I'm very curious about the hiring, the marketing, and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But two things that, as far as facilities, that I'm interested in is number one, we have a decent lot here. I mean, obviously it's not the size of Elbrook, but we have a decent lot. I think it is more along the same lines as Eastbrook, if not a little bit bigger, as far as open green space. But I thought
Great.
about, because we're on the East Coast, maybe there's a use of tents to some degree, air conditioned tents, because we just don't have the gym. So I was trying to figure out how can we do the gym
It's
for
very hot here. Yeah.
and they said, so with air conditioning, that could make things a little bit more manageable, an air conditioned tent. How could you see something like that used? And then I got a second question after that.
So here in Milwaukee, it isn't the only place that I've done camps like this. I grew up being a counselor in a day camp setting in Illinois, where we had an outdoor permanent tent structure that if you get further down the road, it was not air conditioning, but it wasn't air conditioned, but it had the capability to fit about 400 kids in it. It had AstroTurf and a stage and a sound system, but it was open air on the sides. I mean, it had screens, but it was not air conditioned. So I can show you a lot of possibilities. The other is that you may actually have the space you need inside for certain things, and then you could be outside for a lot of other things. It really, if you can get the kids in the summer for a certain amount of time, and I think you're speaking to this, Pastor Whitfield, is if you can get them into an air-conditioned environment for a little bit of downtime, that would be good. And for some of those classes, or the activity groups, we call them, like cooking or painting, like art and things like that, or even the Lego camps that we had and stuff like that, being in a regular classroom actually works pretty well. It sounds like you have a school there, and being in a regular classroom, it gets them inside, it gets them in a cooler environment, and that actually really helps them last the whole day. So I think you could do that for sure. There might actually be other ways to do that without having to spend that major amount of money.
All right, the second question that I had, and I think this is all going to tie together. My son Sebastian went to the preschool at Elmbrook. How did you deal with that preschool and Camp Vertical together?
We ended up at first not great. That's why I said that's going to be a space to navigate. At first, not great. And then what we were able to do is most of the preschool closed down for the summer. We kept 2 and 3-year-olds classes, but the other kids could go to camp. And it was actually cheaper for their parents. And it was the same length of time because there was extended care. And so we kept a 2 and 3-year-old program with the preschool. And then the others, we closed down the preschool for the summer because it wasn't actually needed. And those families were happy, and they came back in the fall having saved money too.
Okay.
But we can talk through that a little bit more with the folks who were involved in that process. I'm sure they would be willing to talk and say, hey, here's how we came to those conclusions, because it took a little while because it's once again trying to figure out how do you build continuity in a preschool, and if you let a family go to another program, will we ever get them back, and all those different things that are normal and natural, and we have to figure out. And so those things were things we had to navigate.
Great. Can you go, I guess, dive into, did anybody have any questions?
The only comment I have, Brodie, this is Bev again. I would like to see this be the only option for 4 and up for our summer program for our school. Would that, except for infant toddlers, they would stay in their wing, but the older kids would all go to camp because that would be their summer program.
I think that's a great idea, and if you can start it out that way, you're better off. Because then it's just that, and I think the kids will be, to be honest with you, the kids will be happier because you introduce the issue of choice, and you introduce the issue of fast-paced, high energy, and the teachers who are working hard during the school year to maintain an orderly, systematic classroom are not suddenly trying to create a camp environment, because that switch is almost impossible. And so you allow other sets of leaders to be able to create a camp environment where kids are having a different experience, and those teachers who are really good at creating an orderly classroom get to dive back in the fall and really do what they're best at. They don't have to switch.
Great. Hey, Brodie, I was wondering if you could do me a favor. Can you jump into the day in the life of Camp Vertical?
The day in the life of Camp Vertical.
Actually,
yeah.
Before you do, I apologize. I have to leave the meeting. Thank you for participating, Brodie. Appreciate it. Pastor Whitfield, wherever we need to touch base on, please let me know. And it sounds very exciting.
All right, sounds good. We'll be talking about it. Thanks so much, Travis.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
So a day in the life of camp, and I think it was part of one of those documents that I sent over. Basically, what we figured out is that if a parent worked from 8 to 5, then they would need an opportunity. Some parents needed to work from 8 to 5, so they would need an opportunity to drop their kids off early and pick them up late. You have other families that, maybe mom's a school teacher, or maybe mom or dad doesn't have to work and they're staying at home, and the kid doesn't want to get up at the crack of dawn. And so we kind of built it this way. At 7:30 every morning, I'll go from the kids' perspective. If you want to know the staff perspective, I can tell you that schedule too. But at 7:30, we open extended care. And it was from 7:30 to 9:30 would be extended care, which means that it was kind of a free-flowing. We split our gym up. You could do it with rooms into a quiet side and an active side, is to say, okay, there's kids who just want to get up and blow off steam, and they want to play dodgeball or basketball or play catch with a football or whatever, and they want to run around. And then you got other kids who would just as soon like to sit and color, or they'd like to play a game, or they just want to sit and veg and watch a movie with a leader. And so we had a quiet side that would always have an approved movie. We did a lot of stuff like Pixar stuff that was just, not all of them, but a lot of them that were just movies that the kids enjoyed. They didn't have any redeeming spiritual value, but they were just to set an environment where kids could hang out with leaders. We had a ton of really good conversations and a ton of connections that happened there. And so that environment would happen from 7:30 to 9:30, and it was very free flowing. Kids could come. It was, for the kids, it was $5 per session. The parents could show up as they wanted to, and it ended up, by the end of the time, we'd have 250 kids in that environment by the time the morning ended. And the beauty of that is that parents are helped, and the other beauty of that is that because of the ratios that you need in that environment, that can actually be a huge moneymaker to supplement the places in the program that you're always going to lose money as well. And so it was very helpful in helping it become self-sustaining. And then at 9:30, the kids started coming. That's when check-in would start, as far as in the main area. And kids would start coming and be checked in, and they would free play with their parent or with their leaders in a really wide open area. And I'm a big proponent of free play. Not everything needs to be organized and structured. Free play is really good, and a lot happens within free play that are both learning experiences and good for the cognitive, physical, and emotional development of these kids. And so there would be chalk drawing and basketball shooting and jump roping, anything you can possibly think of, 4 square, 9 square, 15 square, whatever it is that gaga ball, all these different things they'd have out there. And so the kids would play, and at 10 o'clock, we would start our main day, and all the kids would go into one large room. We had an amphitheater, and we'd do kind of an opening segment of things. They'd be sitting with their activity group, which they would have, once they're in an activity group, right now they offer 15 activity groups a week. And you kind of stay with your group, whether you're with the whole camp or just doing your activity. You stay with the whole group, or you stay with your group. So if you chose basketball, all the basketball kids now, once we start at 10 in the morning, they're together, whether they're in that large room environment or whether they're playing basketball in the gym or whether they're out at lunch, they all kind of stay together. And so we'd go in, we'd have an opening type of just a rah-rah thing, get excited, tell the kids what the day would be about a little bit. And then we'd have an all camp game. And one of the beauties of this, this may get a little bit further down, but it'll help you understand, is that we did something called snow cone points. Every Friday, we would give free snow cones to every kid in the camp. And all week long, they would earn snow cone points. for games that they won, for great behavior, for, things that were just really good. We give snow cone points, which cost me nothing, but they wanted them, and they would collect them because the team with the most snow cone points got to be first in line for snow cones. The snow cones that everybody was going to get, they would compete all week long and be on their best behavior in certain spots so that they could be first in line. And so it became our behavioral incentive system, and the kids wanted snow cone points. We could give away 1 million of them if we wanted to in one swipe, and it didn't cost us anything. And the only thing they were competing for was to be first in line for something that everybody was going to get anyways. So it was a big win, and nobody got left out. And so those morning games, and I can explain some of those, are all camp games, whether it's, we had a giant scavenger hunt, or they had something called Discs of Doom, where we took old CDs that we had collected, and they were just hidden all over the place, and they had different point value. Or some leaders would go hide, and they would find the leaders for snow cone points. And so they'd have this game where they're competing, and the whole camp's together. And then after that game, which lasted for about a half hour or so, then they would go and they would start participating about 11 o'clock in the activity that they chose. And so from 10:45 or 11 until noon, which was lunch, they would participate. If they chose basketball, they'd be playing basketball. If they chose cooking, they'd be cooking. If they chose Legos, they'd be doing Legos. And they had that hour and 15, hour and a half of really dedicated activity time, because that's what they came to do. They chose that. And so we want them to have a lot of time in that. And then everybody eats lunch together. And we did that outside, and most of the time they bring their lunch. And we provided lemonade and water. And as things started to move on, we happened to have a full service catering company that was using the commercial kitchen at the church, and they decided, well, hey, we could provide lunches for the kids that wanted to, and so they provided a lunch option where parents could purchase that, and then suddenly that entity had a real moneymaker for them in the summer, because we never saw any of that money at the camp, but they were able to say, we can provide a service, we can do something good for the kids, it can be nutritious, we can be creative, and it sustains us in the summer, and it was a benefit to the kids and families. So that happened to work out. So we'd eat lunch from 12 to 12:30. We'd have a restroom break, the only dedicated restroom break. Now, they could take different restroom breaks with a leader walking them with another leader to the restroom and being able to let them go in during the time. But this was our only dedicated restroom break, was right after lunch. And then we'd go into our large group time, which would include worship, which would include some sort of different thing. We did Old School Tuesday, where we'd sing some old song that I learned when I was in Sunday school, like Deep and Wide, or Father Abraham, and those types of things. And we'd sing those and have a good time. We always had, and this is going to sound really weird, but eventually it will make sense, is that we had puppets every summer that were characters that joined us every day, and there would just be a conversation between the person up front and those puppets kind of came to life, and they had personality, and it was a pretty integral part of just developing the theme and the plot lines for the summer all over the place. And so we'd have that, and then there would be a lesson where one of my teachers would get up, and this was not a PowerPoint or anything. It needed to be a dynamic storytelling with something that had a point. We had weekly themes where we'd take Old Testament heroes or New Testament heroes, or we'd talk about, creation. We'd take Storybook Week and take some of the best children's literature that's out there today as far as storybooks, read them, and then have the kids enjoy the story, but also be able to say, well, it doesn't just have to be a story that somebody wrote. The Bible actually backs up this concept, and so we'd be very careful to choose that. But then after that large group teaching time, then there was a 20-minute small group time where kids that were in basketball were sitting with kids that were in basketball with a leader that was in basketball. So they'd spent the morning developing a relationship. They'd spent the whole week developing a relationship, and all of that was built to get them to that small group time, so that relationships were built, that conversation was easy, and that leader that they trust and they love and that they know was now actually able to share important things about God, important things about Jesus, to open God's word right in front of them physically and say, this is what the Bible says. And for kids to finally feel comfortable saying, well, I've got a question, and I got a rabbit trail that I want to go down, and that leader was prepared to do that. That's small group. When we talk about what is the most important part of camp, it's the small group time right after the large group time. The large group time is fine, but it only is setting up the small group time. The activity groups that they're in, basketball has to be done well. Why? Because we want that small group time to be prepared. extended care has got to go well, and those leaders need to be building relationships. Why? So that when they get to that small group time, kids are ready to engage. Small group time right there for 20 minutes is the center of the bullseye for camp. That's where it all happens, and everything else is to build towards that. And then after that small group time, they go back to their activity group for the rest of the afternoon until dismissal. If they chose basketball, they go back to basketball. We like them to have about 2 to 2.5 hours of their chosen activity every day. And we go in and out of large groups, small groups, so that they don't get stuck. that they don't get stuck just like saying, well, I've been playing basketball for 3 hours and now I'm tired. We want them to keep moving in and out of different environments so that they're re-engaging, and it just reignites their attention span. And then at the end of the day, we have a gathering, and then we dismiss, and parents come and pick up. We had it at 3:30. Parents would pick up at 3:30, and then those parents that weren't able to pick up, their kids knew they were going to extended care, and we would take those kids back to another session of extended care, which would be from about 3:30 to 5:30, and parents could pick them up anywhere in there, but we were definitely done by 5:30.
Questions, folks?
What about the, I understand what you were saying, that was Camp Vertical, right? What about Camp Zoom? Isn't that for the little guys?
Yeah, Camp Zoom for a couple of years was a half day, and then we found that the kids could handle a fuller day, and they can be part of extended care at 7:30. They can go all the way to 5:30. What we intentionally did is we built a bulk of the heavy activity in the morning, because that's when those kids are most active. And then after lunch, there was a lesson time and a small group time, and then there was a little bit of a down time, like a rest period, that they got to be part of. So actually, the lesson time actually happened before lunch in Zoom. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It happened before lunch in Zoom, because there were a number of families that would pick up their kids at noon. And so the afternoon was, they would have time to do their activities again. They would also have time to rest, and there would be intentional rest time, or at least downtime where it wasn't running around and doing high energy stuff, so that those kids could make it through the day. And by and large, the first week, those kids were really crabby by the end of the day. And by week 3 or 4, if they were there consistently, they were starting to build the endurance for the day.
Did you guys provide any transportation at all?
None.
Because we may have a lot of mothers that have only one car.
Oh yeah. I mean, we can do that. That's a different kind of thing there. Bev wrote a question about insurance.
Yeah.
That's part of that question.
What did you guys have to change with your policy?
Not much. We had to get some clearance for the skateboarding groups and the archery groups. We just had to talk to our insurance, but mostly what you have to cover the church on a regular basis covers what you're going to be doing in these environments.
Okay.
Well, we're inside of a neighborhood. Do we need any special permits to do this?
You're going to have to ask your local folks on that one. I don't think you'll need a permit to do it, but I think you may want to talk to your neighbors. We talked to our neighbors about how there was going to be a little bit of additional noise, but that there wasn't going to be any kids wandering into their yards or anything like that, and we weren't going to be putting a ton of loudspeakers out on a field and just disturbing the peace all day long. We did have speakers outside, and we did play music, but we did testing so that we could hear what the sound was going to be like for a neighbor. And then we just built good relationships with neighbors, and we shared the vision of what we were trying to do and how we were going to do it in a way that would not impact them for the most part. And by and large, we found them to be pretty amicable to that.
Security. One of
Yeah.
the things that I remember is I got stopped by one of your security guards who was on a perimeter search.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit how you guys set that up, because I was quite impressed. I was upset at the time, but I'm impressed.
Taking from a different
That's right.
We were fairly meticulous about security, because Okay, kid, I'm just going to be honest with you, because if you're not scared of somebody walking into the middle of the environment, either opening fire or taking a kid, stuffing them in a trunk, and driving out of the parking lot, then you need to be scared of that, because in this day and age, if you're outside and you're trying to figure out how do you keep kids safe, it should worry you. But the fact of the matter is that we were meticulous about perimeter. And so in the morning when we had free play, there were a lot of leaders that were engaged, but we also had leaders that were, if they were doing chalk drawing or something like that, they were chalk drawing with kids, a group of kids, but near a spot on the perimeter where they could keep an eye on things. And we had others who were roaming, and we had trained the leaders so that if they were not watching what was going on right next to them all the time, but they had their eyes scanned to the horizon, if they saw a strange person, an adult they did not know entering the kid's space, their job was to be between that adult and the kids at all times. And so we trained that. And then when we had specific games such as Capture the Flag, where we used the whole church property, then we had walkie-talkies in the hands of individuals who were stationed. We actually drew it out on a map and placed people in certain places. And their job was to not play the game, but was just to watch the perimeter and make sure the kids were safe. Not only if they fell and hurt themselves, but that they were safe, that they couldn't get out and nobody else could get in. And we communicated by walkie-talkie. And then at check-in and check-out, we were meticulous about making sure that kids went through a certain funnel and that parents had to check those kids out so that we knew where they were. Our registration system was a Wi-Fi environment that operated with the location of, was a kid in our care or checked out to a parent's care, who was that parent or adult figure that had checked them out, and we knew that in real time. And we can get to all that, but security is essential, and no kid goes anywhere alone, and no leader goes anywhere alone with a kid. If a kid had to go to the bathroom, the leader was instructed to grab two other kids and say, hey, we're going to walk to the bathroom. I need you to come with. Or if a volunteer was going to go somewhere, they didn't just go by themselves. There were always twos. Nobody ever went anywhere alone. And so that was part of ours. And then we had certain boundaries. There was a whole side of the church that we never used, and nobody was allowed there. And if you got caught there, we called it the back 40. If you were caught there, that was trouble. And so we built an environment where we did that. We also, because we were on walkie-talkies and frequencies can be jumped and listened in on, we also renamed everything, fun names. So instead of the top of the classroom building being, it was the B wing and it was the 300 level, and instead of calling it the B300s, which was its official title and on the church map, we called it the tower. And so if somebody jumped our signal and was listening and somebody said, hey, I'm taking a group of kids to the tower, well, if they had a map of the church, they had no idea. So we had names like the tower and the meadow and the tree house and the amp and all of these different places in the zone where only the vocabulary, the leaders knew the vocabulary, and it created a bond, like there was some sort of special thing that they were a part of. And anybody who jumped our signal was not able to know where anybody was because they would have no clue. So we were meticulous about making sure that it was a safe and secure environment, and one that I would leave my kids personally, without a worry that they would be okay. So.
This is Steve.
Yes.
Sorry, Pastor.
No.
So it sounds like you had a complete security plan set up. Mm-hmm. I guess my other question was how long you have. It looked like you had middle-aged and high schoolers that were involved in the council process. So how long did you actually do training for them? And how did you entice them to come in and be a camp counselor?
We pay them. They're looking for a summer job, and we pay minimum wage and guarantee 40 hours. Middle school age, what we found was the middle school age wasn't our first thing, but it became a big one because kids would come through the program. They would love the program, but then when they got to be middle school age, it wasn't for their age anymore. And so we would bring them as volunteers. We call them volunteers, which are basically leaders in training. And if you tell anybody I said this, I'll deny it till the day I die. But they were basically big kids and gophers. But they got to learn in a leadership environment. We intentionally built leadership meetings in every day for those middle school volunteers so that they were starting to learn leadership skills. And they were able to do certain very small, very safe for us to give to them tasks, getting equipment, going with a leader to take a kid to the restroom, helping a kid who is having problems just adjusting or was having a really rough day. They could be a friend to them. And we built basic things in. The high schoolers and the college age, we kept a lot of college age students. They kind of usually stayed freshman, sophomore, a lot of them junior year, and then they had to get right before their junior year, and then they had to get an internship or things before their senior year. So we lost a lot of them there. But we kept a lot all the way through. And the way that we did it was we paid minimum wage. We guaranteed 40 hours. And as you were older and over 18, then you could work the extended care hours, which was 4 hours a day if you were scheduled for it. And that's another $40 a day. So you can make some pretty decent money compared to what you're going to make at a Subway or whatever, where you're only going to get, 30 hours a week. We offered an environment that was much different. The training was ongoing, but for sure, we started with a week-long training. There was a training week that everybody was required to be at for the entire week. We went 8 hours a day for that entire week, which means we were able to set up the environments. We were able to get the equipment ready. We were able to train on the spiritual aspects, the security aspects, the staffing requirements. They were able to bond a little bit. We split them into groups of how they were going to work with basketball and cooking and things like that. They got assigned all those things, and they started to plan those events a little bit. That all happened in a week before the first week of kids. So we got them for an entire week, and we just pour into them. And then every morning there's a staff meeting, and every afternoon after the kids leave or go to extended care, there's another staff meeting, and we're constantly pouring into, hey, what were the situations you ran into today? What are you frustrated with? What went really well? How did your small group go? And we continue to talk and share best practice. And then one-on-one, I had higher leadership that were coaches towards the end, where they didn't have kids under their care. They were there to coach leaders on how to help their kids. So they're roaming around and constantly doing best practice and pulling somebody aside and saying, hey, you did a great job here, but you could have done this, and here's how I handled this. And so constant, every day, in the middle of situations, leadership development, and it's the best hands-on way for those ages. So we continue to develop them. And then over the years, it created an environment where I didn't have to initiate it anymore. They actually did it themselves, to the point where I kind of felt useless because they didn't need me anymore. And so that's kind of the way that worked.
So in addition to that question, how did you scout? Because you've answered most of the hiring questions that I've had, but how did you scout to get the college students to want to work for you?
I actually took our college students that were already working for us and saying, be our representative. Tell me the people that you want to work with this summer that you go to school with. And tell me who goes to this church that I should be talking to, and you go talk to them as well. And the leaders, after the first couple of years, I had to sell it. And I had to sell it by saying, hey, you're going to be guaranteed 40 hours. You're going to get to have the most fun you've ever had, and you're going to get to see life change right in front of you. And a certain segment of leaders is going to grab onto that. And here's the thing. This is going to sound a little sacrilegious, and so please excuse me. You don't want only your super spiritually fit kids doing this. Part of this whole environment is you take a kid who's great at basketball, who loves kids, and you put them in the middle of that thing, and kids start asking them, when was God created? I mean, Adam and Eve were created. When was God created? And then suddenly that leader has to go, I don't want to look dumb in front of a group of kids. And so I'm going to actually get in the word, and I'm going to go ask somebody these questions that I don't know that I know the answer to. And suddenly they start to grow by leaps and bounds, and their faith gets developed in the middle of an environment where the kids can get their questions answered by their leader being smart enough to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And you start to develop those young people. I was never like the first one to church on Sunday morning, but I was basketball, soccer, golf, and just uber athlete. And I wanted to be around kids because I had a fun time playing sports with them. But then I suddenly had to reckon with the fact that, I need to know how to answer these kids' questions because this is important stuff and I don't want to let them down. And so you get leaders from all different walks of life, and you try to figure out, okay, do they have a decent faith? Do they have salvation? First of all, are they saved? I had so many kids apply that had never met Jesus before, college students, because they had heard great things about the job and wanted to have a great time, but I wouldn't hire them because they didn't know Jesus. And then you go, okay, is this a person who's going to be a good influence? And some of it, you just go with your gut, and you're going to hit a double or a triple on 80% of them, and you're going to miss on some. And after a while, you start to figure out, okay, what's the fit for this environment, and how do I know that this person's in the right place? So.
But I'll open it up for a couple more questions. The last question that I have is marketing. What did you do to promote this thing, to get people excited and involved? Because I know you guys you're full with a waiting list. So
yeah,
what was your marketing plan?
It took time. It took time. Your best marketing plan is word of mouth. Parents talk, and if you can get into different parent groups. So the first year, our biggest week was 146 kids. Okay, now they're capped out at about 700 kids. But our first week was 146 kids, and we thought it was great. And what we had done is we'd gone to the Christian schools in the area and put posters up and asked to say something. We went to hospitals because hospitals usually have a fair for their workers, their nurses and their doctors, somewhere in February or March, where all of the providers locally of summer programs for kids will come and present there. And then there's usually some sort of kids organization that's going to say, hey, summer childcare. And I hate the word childcare. It's a swear word for me, but I will go to the places where people think they're getting good childcare, and I'm actually able to do kingdom work. And so we just showed up at those different fairs, the childcare fairs, the hospitals. We got on the radio a couple times and did some radio spots so that we could get into different parent groups. Because what happens is you get into one parent group, and then they start to say stuff, and you get about 30 families who are talking about it. But then those kids start to age and grow older, so you have to get into another group of parents that run with each other. And if one family out of that starts, they're going to start talking, and then that'll spread like wildfire. And so you just have to do things to get into the different groups. And it's an imperfect science. And so I went with the hospital fairs, I went with the schools, I went with the Christian schools. The other thing that we did, Alexander, that you would know, is that we ended up going to schools at the end of public schools at the end of the year and saying, hey, you have like a 5th grade fun day, or you have a field day for your school. And what if we came and were part of that? And we didn't talk about camp, and we certainly didn't talk about Jesus, but we just had a lot of young people come out and have a blast with your kids. And we would organize it. We would take the load off of you. And we had 2 schools in the Brookfield area, and now there's 4 schools in the Milwaukee area that we send leaders to right at the end of their school, because college students are back. So we grabbed college students that were part of camp before. And so this was a couple years in. But then we just went and we were part of it, and the kids are like, oh, I know where you're from. I've seen you before. You're at camp. And then they talk to the friends that they have in their class, and the kids are like, well, I want to go to that camp if that leader's going to be there. And so word of mouth is your friend. And if you do a good program, then people are going to come. Parents are going to talk about how cheap it is. Kids are going to talk about how fun it is. And the high school and college age students are going to talk about what it is for them, whether it's a full-time paid job or it's a great experience, and they get to have a ton of fun and during the year. So word of mouth is your best marketing. And sometimes we kicked it through, we would hit a zip code with postcards.
I have an enrollment question, Brodie.
Yes.
Did you permit children to just pick certain weeks, or were they required to attend the whole summer as a full-time student? How did that go?
No, they get to choose. They can come to 1 week or all 8. And I would say if we took our numbers, I think we had 35% that came to all 8. And then you had a bunch that came to 3 or 4, and you had very few kids came to 1 week.
But it wasn't by day, correct? It was by week.
Correct. Yeah, don't do it by day. You'll kill yourself.
Right. Absolutely.
That's how we do it now.
I was scared. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, no. Oh wow. The only thing that is day by day whenever you want it is the extended care.
Okay.
We just wanted to make that to be, hey, if you need it, then great. Sign up ahead of time. If you need it that day because you got a meeting early at work and you normally drop the kid off at 10, but you need to drop them off at 7:45, we want to serve you that way. And it actually is a great experience for your kid, and it helps us build a sustainable program.
And then on that same thought, how much down did you require, or all down, or how did they pay?
Okay, so this is where um, the ideal, the ideal is that they pay in full at the beginning. Except for the extended care, they just pay as they go. The reality is that there's a lot of families that can do that. They can write a check for $800 or whatever it costs for 8 weeks of camp. But what we started out at $80 a week. We're now at $105, which is pretty reasonable. If you think about a babysitter, if you have a babysitter for 8 hours a day for a full week, you are paying close to $500. And that's just basic. If you send your kid to camp with us and you go 8 hours a day, it costs you $105. It's a no-brainer. But what we found is that there's a lot of families that can't pony up that kind of money. I know mine couldn't. And so we built payment systems in where you could have a payment system with the understanding is we opened registration most times on Christmas Eve, so parents could give their kids camp for Christmas. But they could build a payment system that just made sure that it was paid in full by the time camp started. So they had 6 months to make the payments.
Thank you.
I will tell you that's an administrative nightmare, but it is worth it, and it provides opportunity for families.
I can help you manage that.
All right, gang, questions? Any other questions?
Did you have any medical facilities on site?
No, we didn't, but here's what we had to do. It's interesting you asked that question. We decided after about the second year that we needed to grow up and become a big boy camp. What we had been doing is, hey, we had first aid and all these different things, and the children's ministry administrative assistant was running the registration and all of the details, and we decided, okay, we need to hire a nurse. And so some of our college students who were nursing students, we hired not to be with kids, but to actually come back and be the camp nurse. And all of them, it's not only kids who fall down and hurt themselves, it's all the medications that actually have to be distributed nowadays would all go through the camp nurse and would be documented, and we'd have parents signing off, and we had a system there. The other thing we had to do was we hired an administrator. We hired a camp administrator who handled all registration. They worked 10 hours a week throughout the year from September till May, and then in May they started to bump up, and then in the summer they were 40 hours a day, or 40 hours a day. It might have felt like that. 40 hours a week, and in the end we hired some of our camp staff, like college students who were looking to go into different areas of administration, and we hired them to be underneath this administrator. So we had an office staff as well as a nurse.
That answers my other question. I was curious about how did you do the full-time and part-time admin people who helped all this stuff work?
Yeah, most of the time it was a mom who was just really good at what she did as far as registration and stuff, but didn't want to work full-time. But then in the summer when their kids could go to camp while they were there, then she was the full-time camp administrator, and she would work throughout the year with a little bit of a bump when we launched registration, but most of the time about 10 hours a week paid. Paid at $10 an hour. We went above minimum wage, so it was $10 an hour. She could do most of it from home, and so it became a win-win for everybody.
One of the other things, I guess, that connection to that, what was your journey with the software? I know you guys have a preschool already, and
yeah,
you use something for that. Then I think you're telling me you had the iPod things, and I know then that transitioned to something else. Just tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I would tell you. Okay, I'm gonna be straight up honest with you on this one. Is that our registration and check-in process became a victim of being a big church. So if you guys were to move forward, I would connect you with a lady. I sat down with a woman named Nancy Mullen and a number of other staff, and on a whiteboard, we drew out what we wanted for our security so that I would have a real-time environment where I knew what kids were checked in, who had checked them in, what kids were checked out, when they were checked out, by who, in real time on an iPad at any given moment. Because I felt like that was what I needed, because I'd had parents come in and go, well, I'm here to pick up my kid, and they weren't there, and they would say, well, who checked them out? And we didn't know in the previous system. And so now all we had to do was look up the kid and say, hey, this is your pre-approved person that you already said could pick them up. They picked them up at 3:25 and they checked them out, so you might want to call them. And suddenly I had answers that built confidence in our environment. And so we worked with this woman. She wrote the program. It is a great program. It did not fit into the rest of the systems of the church. And so a few years ago, they changed the system to have a unified system across the church, and it actually didn't help camps. So if you were to move forward, Pastor Whitfield, I would connect you with Nancy and say, hey, I think this would be a good fit for you guys to have a conversation. Because her system worked like a charm. It was brilliant.
Okay.
Did her system include pictures?
Pictures of?
Children and the parents, so you can match them up?
Not children, but definitely parents.
Thank you.
We don't want to take pictures of children at any point in time that we don't have to.
Had you ever used a planning center program or anything of that design?
Not with camps, but I know that planning center is it's a pretty robust system, and it's getting more robust. And so I think it'd be well worth. The thing you want to figure out is not only can you schedule something, but can it be a registration and security system in the same thing? So you're not having to port information back and forth over things. Stuff gets lost there all the time.
So, like, was your church using, was the preschool using ProCare or Sandbox or something? And why?
No, it was using ACS is the parent company. I can't remember the name of the program right now that they're using for the preschool check-in.
Okay. And I know that one, but you guys decided not to use it for camp.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. They're using another system entirely right now that's actually not helpful.
Okay.
Why?
Too many glitches. It costs a lot. It doesn't get. Here's the thing: is that when you get to the size of a church that Elmbrook is, then you need to have systems that you don't have to sustain on your own because you don't have technology people. You've outsourced your technology support. And so Nancy's system is one that Nancy supports. And if we had maybe one or two glitches in the amount of time, but there was nobody else that would support it at that point in time except for Nancy, and the church was uncomfortable with that. I was not uncomfortable with that because by and large it was 90% in a good place. But there are other camp systems out there. You just got to figure out your cost. Is that it'll be, $5 per registration or whatever like that. There's a ton of them out there. This is going to be a unique setup for registration, and you're just going to have to figure out how to navigate those spaces. But that's a secondary thing. You can find how to do that. It'll be one of the bridges you cross.
Okay. Any other questions, folks? Hey, Brodie, I appreciate our time today. You've given us a lot to chew on and discuss. I really appreciate this, and we'll be in touch because we're going to go to the next step. We just have to kind of figure out what stages and, roadmap or checkpoints that we need to make along the way and decision points. And if you have any insight on that, that would be helpful to say, okay, you guys probably need to think about this now, or by August or October, this kind of needs to be done, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there are definitely some of those. I would also put you in contact with some other folks who would allow you to get a view of what it's like to do it in a smaller church. than Elmbrook. Not a small church by any stretch, but a smaller church. There's a number of churches around here that have done it, that were churches of 700, whatever, like that, and some of the dynamics are much different, and you can actually hear their voice on what they did and didn't do. I had to do some things with my team by necessity that maybe you don't have to do in some other spaces, or you can bring it along a little bit slower, and they might be able to give you some good insight on that.
Fantastic. Well, again, thanks again for so much for your time, Brodie. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll get something exciting going here, and see how we can bless the people here in Virginia Beach.
I'm excited for you. You know what I would do? One of the first things I would do if I were you is see if you can pull any of the demographic information from the 2010 census and say, okay, within 3, 5, 10 miles of this church, how many kids do you have access to? Because what you want first and foremost is to say, what's the mission field? The other stuff, you'll work as hard as you can if you can say, hey, here's our opportunity and here's what we want to do. And so that might be one of the first things I'd do, is just look at your demographics of your kids and your families.
Great. All righty. Sounds good. I appreciate your time, and God bless.
All right. Talk to you guys soon. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.